Stop saying that your Jingyuan cleared when in reality your Sunday and Robin or RMC dragged his lifeless corpse to the finish line. But can we stop being allergic to having a better game? When people critique Elden Ring, people might disagree, but they're always open to the idea of improving the game, even though it literally won Game of the Year and is considered one of the greatest games of all time. I play 5 gacha games right now, and I play them all free to play. I do not own any monthly passes or battle passes. Some might say I should be the only motherfucker getting praised.
I recently got into a heated disagreement with a good friend of mine over comparing Star Rail to Fate Grand Order. We're still friends because any adult with brain cells knows you can disagree with someone and still get along as good friends. Up until this year, I thought that was common knowledge, but I'm digressing. That conversation inspired me to write a video about how Star Rail seems to have convinced people that they're good at a strategy game when in fact they're good at spinning the wheel. So keeping with the theme of my last video, let's talk about what turn-based games are actually like. Now, as with my last video, my goal isn't to attack people for enjoying Star Rail. I also play the game daily, which I have my reasons for, despite the first 2 videos talking about it fairly negatively. Also keeping in line with my first video, my intention is to discuss something that I see as an issue and use examples to back up why I think the way I do. Since last time I was speaking very broadly about the Big Four, I couldn't logically tackle systems unique to the genre of open world or turn-based. This video will serve as a more specific look at the ladder. In this video, we will go over 3 turn-based systems that when done correctly produce amazing turn-based games, from gachas like Girls Frontline 2, Fate Grand Order, and Limbus Company, to non-gachas such as XCOM 2, Slay the Spire, and the Persona games, and how Star Rail has managed to miss the mark and butcher these systems in the name of money, RNG, and just poor design choices. We'll be using examples from both inside and outside the gacha genre, since being a gacha game does not make it exempt from turn-based critique, especially when Hoyoverse is a multi-billion-dollar company, yet some of these turn-based games are made by small teams if not just a single developer. At the end, I'll try to address some counter-arguments and clarify my points, but of course if you disagree, let me know in a constructive way so that people can discuss these topics rather than fighting about them. The reception to my last video was incredibly positive, so hopefully this video will be even better. With all that said, let's talk about why I consider Star Rail an insult to turn-based games. First, let's go over some of the systems that Star Rail has and my issues with them. I'm going to assume that you're familiar with the general combat of Star Rail, so I won't dive too deep into explaining its systems. That way I can talk more about the issues with those systems. Let's start by talking about type weaknesses. To be clear, I'm talking about when an enemy has elements above their toughness bar, indicating which elements reduce their toughness and cause them to become broken. So what is the point of type weakness? Generally speaking, weaknesses are a way to make fights more engaging, as it makes the player think more about how to approach each fight. Oftentimes, the player also comes with weaknesses, meaning the fight isn't just about what you're fighting, but also whether the enemy can exploit any potential gaps in your lineup. A great example of type weaknesses in games is Pokemon. Now, I know this isn't a gacha game, but hear me out for just a second. As most people know, all Pokemon moves have an element, and Pokemon have elemental weaknesses. Let's take a look at this dynamic by taking a look at 2 of the Elite Four in Pokemon Emerald. The second fight is against Phoebe and her lineup of ghost Pokemon. Now, since we want to be prepared, we need to bring something that can deal with ghost types. Looking at ghost matchups, we can see that our best options are to use ghost moves or dark moves. We now need to consider that if we bring a ghost type ourselves, we will also take double damage, since we also have weaknesses. This means that we would prefer to find a non-ghost type who knows a ghost move which comes with its own problems, or bring a dark type, though we may need a better strategy to deal with Sableye. Since we need the same team for the whole Elite Four, we can't just bring 6 Dark or Ghost Pokemon. Up next is Glacier, with her lineup of Water and Ice Pokemon. This presents a slightly different problem, where all of her Pokemon are Ice, but since 3 come with Water as well, Fire Pokemon are not able to have a lot of presence against her. Considering our previous fight, we could choose to bring someone like Banette or Dusclops, who are Ghost Pokemon that can also learn Will-O-Wisp, a Fire move. This means they can help in the fight against Phoebe, while also providing some Fire coverage against Glacier, without carrying the weakness against water moves. Or instead, we could look into its other weaknesses, being fighting, rock, and steel. As you can hopefully see, fights aren't just about bringing the bigger, strongest thing. It's about checking what the Elite Four has and how you can best prepare to fight against them. Pokemon has this risk-reward gameplay that encourages you to come prepared, and you are rewarded for doing so. It's not a recommendation, it's a core principle that makes the player feel accomplished when they're able to overcome the opposition, not through gambling and spending money, but through through skill expression and preparation. And for anyone saying, nah, just use Master Ball on Rayquaza, let's just remember the Elite Four is level 46 to 58. If we were 12 levels above the enemies in MOC 12, since you catch Rayquaza at level 70, it would also be a joke. And vice versa, if the Elite Four was level 70, Rayquaza wouldn't just be sweeping every time. Speaking of Memory of Chaos, we can pretend that the enemies have weaknesses, but in reality, these no longer matter. You just bring Firefly, Rapper, Acheron, Boothill, and others to just implant or straight out ignore weaknesses. That level of engagement and prep needed for a boss just isn't there anymore. Adding on to that, the fact we as the player have no weaknesses, there really isn't a reason to not bring these units. And knowing Star Rail, the issue will only get worse. As a side note, a game I mentioned last week, Heaven Burns Red, also does not have weaknesses on the player's side. However, resistances are vital, since if you use a unit that deals slash damage against an enemy with slash resistance, not only do you deal significantly less damage, but you are physically unable to fill up your OD gauge. You may be wondering, what is the OD gauge and why is that important? Well, to talk about that, we need to address another problem with Star Rail, and that is the speed mechanic. I feel like people don't talk about the issues with speed enough. Now, most turn-based games follow a simple formula of you attack, opponent attacks, and this back and forth continues until the end of battle. This is the case for many of the original Final Fantasy games, Persona games, and we even see it in gacha games like Fate Grand Order, SDSGC, and Reverse 1999. Admittedly, that can be somewhat boring, although it's worth noting these games will aim to make up for that through various other combat features and design choices. Speed is not inherently bad as a stat, and the previously mentioned Pokemon also does have speed as a stat. So why is it a problem in Star Rail? Well, it comes in two forms: the acquisition of speed and the modification of speed. So what does that even mean? Let's look at the acquisition of speed, which refers to how we increase our base speed outside of battle. This is mostly done through relics, either from a set bonus, substat, or boot's main stat. The issue is not just the fact that relics are all RNG, but also how you're required to meet specific values that are not in your control, but that allow you to have multiple cycles where you can attack twice before the enemy can even go once. This is why we build characters to meet certain breakpoints, such as 134 speed, as this is the lowest that you can have to move twice on turn 1, and over the course of 15 cycles will provide 5 extra turns, with 136 speed giving 6 extra turns. The problem is even more exaggerated on DPS characters, since while you only usually look to hit 134, you also need large amounts of crit rate, crit damage, and some attack percent. Of course, break DPS aren't quite as hard to build unless your name is Boothill, but this problem then gets even worse when we move on to the second part of it, the modification of speed. This refers to the ways that speed can be modified in battle. This can be done in many ways, such as skills, ultimates, and light cone passives. The issue here should be quite obvious, but this core mechanic of the game that is already gatekept behind RNG is now being further gatekept behind money. People keep pretending that everyone has an S5 dance, when many people don't even have one of them. And unless everyone has forgotten, after Danhang's banner in February of 2024, this was not a rate up 4-star until Aglaya's banner nearly a full year later. This also assumes you're even pulling on the weapon banner, which if you're free to play, I don't know where you find the pulls to be pulling weapons. Getting back on track, my point is that we have yet another mechanic that could have been something fun to experiment with, and have multiple builds where we want more speed for some bosses, more raw damage for others. But instead, the solution is just have both, Omega lol, and this game expects you to have both. We see hypercarry teams that use Robin and Sunday that just don't allow the enemy to have a turn, which also requires speed tuning, which continues to compound the problem even more. Speed tuning is not skill-based. It's not some smart solution to a problem. It's a mandatory optimization locked behind RNG to artificially get you to play the game more. While getting a 0 cycle does 100% take a level of skill, let's not pretend it doesn't also require monetary investment and amazing relic RNG to even be possible. I won't use Pokemon as an example of how to do speed well, since we spoke about it previously. If you're familiar with EVs, IVs, and nature, then hopefully you'll understand that that system is infinitely better. So let's continue where we left off with Heaven Burns Red. So earlier I mentioned it was important to consider the enemy's resistance, because if you attack an enemy that resists your damage type, you can't fill up the OD gauge. This is a bar that fills up when you attack the enemy. And outside of of some specific skills and buffs, you will fill this up the fastest through basic attacks. The way you generally play this game is by stalling out the enemy until you can generate lots of skill points to allow your team to funnel buffs into your main DPS. You can build up to 3 bars of OD, at which point you will gain 1, 2, or 3 additional turns based on the amount consumed, and 5, 12, or 20 additional skill points. This is then when you would stack on your final buffs and delete the enemy health bar. Notice again how this requires you to interact with the game's mechanics to succeed, and encourages boss knowledge that can't just be ignored with money or amazing luck. This game does have a gearing system, but there is significantly less RNG, and building the OD gauge is not buffed through substats, but through equipping gear that you craft, which will always have the passive you selected, not one of 2 different sets like in Star Rail. While I would love to glaze the game even more, this is not the video for that, and we still have one more topic I want to talk about. It's time to cover boss mechanics. Just like with type weaknesses, boss mechanics are a way to make fights feel more engaging and interesting for the player. I think the best way to talk about this is to give examples of what Star Rail calls mechanics, then talk about how other turn-based games do actual mechanics. We're going to start by breaking down the first phase of Incarnation of Strife on MOC12. Also, I just want to say, if you've 3-starred MOC12 against this boss and you don't even know the mechanics I'm going to talk about, that perfectly exemplifies my issue with the lack of boss mechanics, since new shiny units can just ignore this, while older units, even if you play to the mechanics, will not clear without insane investment, both in terms of relics and duplicates and light cones. Also, support power creep is still power creep. Stop saying that your Jingyuan cleared when in reality your Sunday and Robin or RMC dragged his lifeless corpse to the finish line. With that said, let's break down Strife. In the first phase, Lance of Fury will spawn 4 enemies that are copies of your team. Your team will have their health cut in half, and damaging their respective clone will restore a portion of this missing health. This would be an interesting mechanic, aside from the fact it doesn't actually matter. Your goal is to kill everything in front of you, and this mechanic doesn't change that. It doesn't change how you play, especially when this strategy of kill the little guys, then burst the big guy is the same for Swarm, Senior Staff Team Leader, who's just a bigger Automation Grizzly, Fury Praetor, Automation Gatekeeper, Pule, and many, many more. More than half the elite and bosses in floors 10 to 12 have this trait. It's like if I hand you a steak and say you can eat it, but on one condition: you have to chew. Like, yeah, no shit. If I don't, I'll choke and potentially die. You're not asking me to do anything I wasn't already going to do. With that in mind, let's keep going and see if there's anything else. All realms leveled, all legions to dust. World splitting spine, survivors unto dead waters, pyre of high graves, and ruination of night and light are all just basic attacks of various types. They don't do anything except deal damage like any other enemy. This is fine, since even bosses should have regular attacks. We also have 2 talents that I will summarize. Polis Protector is what provides the boss with war armor, which is the 7 stacks next to the boss's HP. Whenever you hit the boss, 1 stack is removed. After the boss takes their turn, all stacks are refreshed. When the stack count reaches 0, the boss takes damage, and the unit that removed that last stack regenerates some energy. While that sounds great and all on paper, this mechanic is still just hit the boss a lot. The second talent is Valorous Death before Glorious Return. After the boss uses Calamity Eternal, the boss gains 12 stacks of Titanic Corpus, which when depleted will cause the boss to take damage, delay their next action, and regenerate some energy for the team. Your team is all given a stack of Glory, which increases damage dealt and energy regenerate. To reduce those stacks, you hit the boss, but now you reduce 2 stacks. So in other words, he has 6 instead of 7. See how this still not has changed the fight in any way? Sure, you can save your Pillar and Aventurine ult to use on the same turn as your DPS ult, but even if you could save like 2 full cycles through optimization, that doesn't matter when it still takes you 8 cycles. And this is only one side. It feels so unrewarding when I can explain these mechanics and take advantage of them, yet if you just pull the new unit and throw money at the problem, you can literally auto the fight and get a faster clear. So how, in my opinion, could we make bosses have more meaningful mechanics? Well, since I know most people don't want to read mechanics and have to use more than 7 brain cells to learn a boss, let's look at a boss that brings together all 3 systems we've spoken about today, which, if it was a gacha game, you could kill the boss with raw damage, but by following the mechanics, you can use a whole list of restrictions on yourself and still clear. Let's talk about Madarame from Persona 5 Royal. This is a 2-phase fight at the end of the second palace. In the first phase, you fight 5 5 paintings, with the gimmick that if they don't all die on the same turn, they respawn with a portion of their max health. So just bring AoE, right? Well, actually, no. You see, the problem is that all parts have a different weakness, and since weakness plays a huge role in this game, allowing you to use baton pass, a mechanic that rewards the player for finding enemy weaknesses and provides additional damage, this also encourages you to prepare for the fight by having coverage over a lot of elements. Instead of focusing entirely on the best personas, you're given the tools to build multiple teams to find the best solution to the presented problem. In this phase, the eyes are there to buff the boss and debuff the player. The nose deals magical damage and the mouth deals physical damage. What's more important is the attacks they all share. They all have a chance to cover one party member in ink, making them vulnerable to all damage types. The other move is the ability to revive fallen pieces of the painting. This adds another layer to the fight, since the boss will focus less on attacking and more on reviving itself, shifting your strategy from just kill everything in front of me to weaken all the pieces, then take them out in a single turn. Moving to the second phase, the boss summons 4 clones that all have a single target attack and an attack buff. They all have different weaknesses based on their color, with the boss himself having no weaknesses. Unlike in Star Rail, these enemies can't just be cleared with AoE trash damage. You need to target their weaknesses to make use of baton pass yet again to be able to take down the boss. Focusing the summons won't end the fight, but focusing the boss will cause your party to fall by the hands of those summons, requiring a more nuanced approach to the fight that balances these two aspects. Hopefully this has been an insightful view on my issues with Star Rail being a turn-based game, but not actually developing any of these pre-existing systems, instead butchering them and making them all feel redundant or as a way to extract more money and artificial playtime from the consumer. Now, to address some counter-arguments before we go, Pokemon and Persona aren't gacha games. You're right, but Hoyoverse isn't an indie developer and has more than enough money to improve their game. Notice how they only released news about meaningful improvements after Wuthering Waves 2.0, and even Chinese fans are complaining. These improvements aren't being announced because they made poor decisions and feel the players deserve better. It's because they were at risk of losing money. Pokemon and Persona aren't mobile games. Also correct. But besides the fact that Persona is also on Nintendo Switch, which really isn't much better than a modern phone, Pokemon was made on hardware that was already outdated by the time you were born. So, being on mobile is not an excuse. Also, we see in Wuthering Waves, they're implementing features that are unique to PC because they acknowledge there's a PC audience. Why can't Star Rail do the same? Not everyone wants to deal with mechanics, and that's fair. But that's why I mentioned Madarame. He's a boss where, in theory, you can ignore the mechanics and just be so strong that he dies anyway. But if you choose to fight him on the game's terms, you are greatly rewarded for doing so. We don't need to implement mechanics that make it so that you can't enjoy the fight by just slamming your keyboard, but implement mechanics so that people who are willing to go the extra mile and learn them can get equal results with less. Star Rail is a casual game. Maybe I need a gambling addiction to understand this, but I play 5 gacha games right now and I play them all free to play. I do not own any monthly passes or battle passes. Some might say I should be the only motherfucker getting praised, but last I checked, casual games are meant to be relaxing experiences with a little grinding and brain-dead content. Not hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of investment and 3 endgame modes that aren't skill-based almost at all, and instead of giving the player any real skill expression, you just throw money at it. And for the slop comments like, well, I'm having fun, sounds like a skill issue, sounds like broke to me, etc, etc. Look, if you enjoy the game, I am genuinely happy for you. Play the games you want to play. But can we stop being allergic to having a better game? When people critique Elden Ring, people might disagree, but they're always open to the idea of improving the game, even though it literally won Game of the Year and is considered one of the greatest games of all time. So let's stop pretending Star Rail has no issues, voice our opinions, and if we agree, perfect, let's give that feedback. And if we disagree, let's discuss why it's not good and how we can find a better solution. Anyway, that's enough for me. This video has already gone on much longer than I originally planned. Thank you for sticking to the end, and I hope to see you next time. Stay safe, everyone.